In the beginning, Facebook was a dorm room fantasy, a social network that could map human connection, a kind of digital yearbook for Harvard students. It was Mark Zuckerberg's brainchild, born in the blurred glow of blue light and code stitched together by caffeine ambition and a mild disregard for privacy. What no one realized then, what even Zuckerberg might not have understood, was that Facebook would become more than a website. It would become a lens through which billions of people perceive reality, a platform that shapes belief identity and behavior. By 2012, Facebook wasn't just a network, it was the nervous system of the modern world. But behind its friendly interface beyond the emojis and photo albums, Facebook was conducting a quiet experiment, one that would eventually alter the course of democracy, mental health, public discourse, and even human autonomy. This wasn't a lab with white coats and microscopes. This was psychological engineering at scale. And the test subjects, us. To understand the roots of this global mind control experiment, we have to go back to the turning point 2010. That was the year Facebook launched the newsfeed algorithm, a dynamic system designed not to inform, but to engage. With every like, comment, and share, Facebook's AI learned more about you. It tracked your fears, your desires, your prejudices, and your political leanings. What began as a tool to prioritize relevant content quickly evolved into a behavioral prediction engine, a machine that could anticipate your next click, your next emotion, your next vote. At first, the system was rudimentary. Posts from friends and family were prioritized. But as more data flowed in, the algorithm evolved. Machine learning models began identifying which content triggered the strongest reactions. It turned out that outrage was the most profitable emotion. Anger kept people scrolling. Fear kept them glued. Division drove engagement. And so the algorithm began favoring content that inflamed, that polarized, that stirred unrest. It wasn't programmed with malice, it was programmed for profit. But in optimizing for attention, Facebook began rewriting the neural architecture of society. The engineers at Menlo Park didn't fully grasp the consequences of their creation. To them, it was all numbers on a dashboard: time spent, engagement rate, click-throughs. But on the ground in Myanmar, in India, in the United States, those numbers translated into real-world violence, mass manipulation, and algorithmic tribalism. The platform that was supposed to bring people together was now tearing them apart. Facebook's internal research began to notice troubling trends. In 2013, a team published findings from a secret experiment conducted on nearly 700,000 users. Without consent, Facebook manipulated the emotional content of their news feeds, showing some users more positive posts, others more negative ones. The goal: to see if emotions were contagious through digital means. The result was clear: they were. People who saw more negative content posted more negatively themselves. Facebook had proven that it could subtly shift the emotional tone of its users without them even knowing. The backlash was brief but fierce. Ethicists cried foul. Psychologists warned of unregulated experimentation on humans. Facebook issued a soft apology. Then they moved on. Because what the public didn't realize was that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, Facebook had begun working with political campaigns, marketing firms, and behavioral scientists to weaponize the very data it collected. The most infamous example, of course, was Cambridge Analytica. In 2014, this obscure British firm harvested data from tens of millions of Facebook users using psychological profiling to target voters with personalized propaganda. They didn't just know what you liked, they knew what you feared, and they used it against you. Cambridge Analytica claimed to have cracked the code of mass persuasion. Using Ocean personality models, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, they developed hyper-targeted ads that appealed to the deepest layers of your psychology. It wasn't about convincing people with facts. It was about nudging them emotionally, irrationally, invisibly. In swing states across America, they unleashed these tools to shift the tide of the 2016 election. Whether or not they succeeded is still debated. But one thing is certain: they exposed a terrifying truth. Facebook had become a laboratory for psychological warfare. And yet nothing changed. Facebook weathered the storm, paid a few fines, and continued optimizing. Their goal remained the same: maximize engagement. Everything else, truth, democracy, mental health, was secondary. Inside the company, whistleblowers like Frances Haugen warned that Facebook's own research showed the platform was harming teens, amplifying hate speech, and spreading misinformation. But the leadership team, driven by growth targets and shareholder pressure, chose inertia over integrity. Meanwhile, the algorithms continued to evolve. By 2018, Facebook was no longer just reflecting human behavior, it was shaping it. Conspiracy theories flourished in the algorithmic dark. Flat Earth groups, anti-vaccine forums, QAnon all found oxygen in Facebook's infrastructure. Recommendation engines pushed users deeper into echo chambers. Content moderation lagged behind, and all the while the company insisted it was just a neutral platform. But it wasn't neutral, it was nudging, steering, influencing. When Facebook made a design change, it wasn't just aesthetics, it was behavioral economics. When they changed notification styles, it altered dopamine release patterns. When they tested delay timers, they saw how long users would tolerate silence before returning for their next digital hit. Every pixel, every prompt, every interaction was data-driven, tested, and optimized, not for your well-being, but for your addiction. And in this environment, truth became malleable. Facts lost their authority. What mattered was what the algorithm rewarded, and the algorithm rewarded intensity. So moderate voices were drowned out. Experts were ignored. Narratives that inspired rage, no matter how false, rose to the top. It was no longer about connecting people. It was about capturing them. By the end of the decade, Facebook had become the largest behavioral modification system in human history. It didn't need to implant chips in our brains. It had something better: our attention. It didn't need to tell us what to think. It only needed to show us what we'd react to. And in doing so, it created a loop. Outrage fed engagement, engagement fed reach, reach fed influence. Around and around it spun until the very fabric of society began to warp. By 2019, the architecture of Facebook's influence had expanded far beyond Silicon Valley. What began as a data-driven ad platform had become a global behavioral engine, one exported to every continent, translated into every major language, and adopted not just by marketers and political consultants, but by governments, authoritarian regimes, and shadowy intelligence networks. The reach was planetary, and with it came a new kind of colonialism, algorithmic, invisible, and terrifyingly effective. In the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte harnessed Facebook's infrastructure to orchestrate one of the most brutal disinformation campaigns in Southeast Asia. His regime hired digital mercenaries to flood the platform with fake accounts, troll farms, and viral propaganda targeting journalists, opposition leaders, and ordinary citizens with harassment, doxing, and algorithm-boosted lies. The platform didn't just allow this, it amplified it. According to a report by the Oxford Internet Institute, the majority of political manipulation campaigns in the Philippines were conducted through Facebook, reaching tens of millions of people daily. This was not an isolated case. In Myanmar, Facebook was instrumental in the spread of genocidal propaganda against the Rohingya Muslim minority. Buddhist extremists and military-linked influencers used Facebook to disseminate false narratives, incite violence, and coordinate attacks. One message, shared thousands of times, read, "We must fight them the way Hitler did the Jews." Facebook's own internal audits revealed that the platform had failed to act despite repeated warnings. Executives admitted they were too slow. But by then, villages had been burned, thousands had been killed, and hundreds of thousands displaced. The UN would later describe Facebook's role as a determining factor in the ethnic cleansing. The same patterns repeated in India, where Facebook's WhatsApp platform became a hotbed of fake news and mob violence. In rural areas, viral hoaxes spread like wildfire, accusations of child kidnapping, organ theft, religious conversion, each one sparking real-world lynchings. Facebook's moderation systems were nearly non-existent in regional languages. Local employees flagged the dangers repeatedly, but internal memos show that company leaders prioritize political relationships over intervention. In particular, Facebook resisted removing hate speech from members of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's ruling party. Why? Because India was one of Facebook's largest growth markets. In Brazil, Facebook helped elect Jair Bolsonaro. His campaign weaponized WhatsApp groups to push massive amounts of disinformation, ranging from fake polling data to doctored videos of opponents. Despite clear violations of platform policy enforcement, was minimal. The algorithm did its job, rewarded whatever content kept users active regardless of truth. And behind the curtain, Bolsonaro's digital army coordinated with marketing firms to exploit the very same micro-targeting techniques once perfected by Cambridge Analytica. What connects all of these events is not ideology, it's infrastructure. Facebook didn't create hate, but it did create the conditions for hate to thrive: frictionless communication, unverified amplification, and no meaningful accountability. It became the ideal tool for psychological warfare, cheap, scalable, and deniable. As authoritarian regimes recognized this potential, they began reverse engineering the system. They learned how to manipulate the algorithm, how to exploit content virality, and how to suppress dissent through coordinated harassment. Troll farms became national assets. Disinformation became state policy. In this new world, elections weren't won at the ballot box, they were won in the newsfeed. And still, Facebook denied its influence. In public hearings, Mark Zuckerberg claimed the platform didn't tilt outcomes. He insisted Facebook was a neutral vessel. But behind closed doors, executives tracked geopolitical impact obsessively. Internal research mapped how changes to the algorithm affected election turnout, voter suppression, and political polarization. One leaked document showed that a tweak to reduce civic content meant to calm tensions actually depressed voter turnout among minority groups. Facebook knew its power. It just chose not to use it responsibly. The implications were existential. If one company could influence elections in dozens of countries, suppress opposition, and amplify authoritarian voices, all with algorithms no one could see, then democracy itself was at risk. What we were witnessing wasn't just corporate overreach. It was a privatized influence operation masquerading as social networking. But this influence wasn't limited to politics. In China, a different experiment was underway, one that Facebook's leadership watched closely. The social control was being codified through digital surveillance, citizen scoring, and content censorship at national scale. While Facebook was banned in mainland China, the lessons from the Chinese model seeped into Silicon Valley through proxy investments, AI research, and shared ambitions. Facebook's experiments in behavioral engineering were not that different, in essence only less centralized. Back in the US, Facebook's role in behavioral manipulation entered a new phase. With the COVID-19 pandemic came an unprecedented wave of misinformation. Anti-vaccine groups, conspiracy theorists, and foreign operatives flooded the platform with content. And once again, Facebook's algorithm rewarded it. Internal documents leaked by whistleblowers showed that Facebook knew its platform was the top source of vaccine misinformation in the world. One study revealed that just 12 individuals, the so-called disinformation dozen, were responsible for the majority of anti-vax content on Facebook. And yet enforcement remained tepid. Why? Because controversy kept people engaged. Fear sold ads. And the cost of real moderation of investing in language-specific content, filters, human review teams, and robust AI tools was high. In many cases, the choice was between cleaning up the feed or keeping the profit margin. Facebook chose profit. But the damage wasn't just political, it was psychological. Across cultures and age groups, users reported rising levels of anxiety, depression, and alienation. Young people especially were vulnerable. A 2020 internal Facebook report revealed that Instagram, owned by Meta, worsened body image issues for 1 in 3 teenage girls. Another slide stated, "We make body image issues worse for girls." The response, minimal action. The growth team pushed forward with Instagram Kids, a product aimed at children under 13, before public backlash forced a pause. The ethical breaches piled up. Researchers were silenced, studies buried. Facebook knew it was running a social experiment with no oversight, one that affected elections, mental health, social cohesion, and even national stability. But the system was locked in. The algorithm couldn't be reversed without dismantling the business model. And the business model was too profitable to change. So the company continued expanding into virtual reality with Oculus, into currency with Libra, into workspaces with Workplace, into the metaverse with Horizon. But at its core, the same principles remained: collect data, predict behavior, influence action. Facebook wasn't just building platforms. It was building behavioral architecture on a global scale. And the public most had no idea. The interface remained friendly, the colors soft, the notifications addictive. Few saw the layers underneath the psychological profiling, the sentiment mapping the predictive nudging. Fewer still understood that the experiment wasn't ending. It was scaling. At the heart of Facebook's mind control experiment lies one fundamental belief: human behavior is predictable and therefore programmable. This wasn't just a Silicon Valley dream. It was an operational directive. Predict what people want, then deliver it before they ask. Anticipate their thoughts, emotions, and reactions, not just to sell ads, but to shape futures. It sounds like science fiction, but the tools already exist, and Facebook built them piece by piece, quietly and methodically. The foundation was data. More data than any entity in history had ever collected. Every like, share, click, message, photo, pause, reaction, location, facial recognition tag, even the milliseconds you hovered over a post logged, stored, analyzed. You didn't need to speak for Facebook to understand you. Your silence was just as telling. This fire hose of human experience became the training ground for Facebook's AI. These models were not merely statistical tools. They were predictive engines trained on hundreds of millions of behavioral samples. If you clicked on an article about immigration at 2:17 p.m. while drinking coffee and stayed on the page for exactly 11 seconds before messaging your cousin, Facebook's model learned from it. Not just what you read, but when you read it, how you felt, how it changed your mood, and what you were likely to do next. In the early days, these models were used to boost engagement. But as the AI matured, so did its goals. Facebook's data science team began building deep psychographic profiles. They could estimate your political orientation with over 80% accuracy based on just 150 likes. They could determine your sexual orientation, emotional stability level of education, and even your childhood trauma, all without asking a single question. The platform didn't just know who you were, it knew who you were becoming. Then came the next phase: nudging. Subtle design choices that guided behavior without your awareness. This is where psychology met code. If Facebook wanted you to engage more with Marketplace, it adjusted notification frequency. If it wanted to push Reels, it reduced load times. If it wanted to boost Stories, it moved the camera button closer to your thumb. Each change was tested on thousands of users. Multivariate A/B tests ran daily. And over time, users adjusted not because they were told to, but because the platform learned what made them tick. This wasn't manipulation in the traditional sense. It was behavioral economics in action. Leveraging principles from Nobel Prize-winning psychologists like Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler, Facebook engineers redesigned your experience to maximize dopamine feedback loops. Notifications were color-coded to trigger urgency. Likes were withheld and released in bursts to increase addiction. Social comparison was algorithmically encouraged to fuel scrolling. These were not bugs. These were features. The most insidious part, you never noticed. Behavioral shifts occurred incrementally, what researchers call the boiling frog effect. Each tweak felt harmless, until one day you realized you were waking up and reaching for your phone like a reflex, checking Facebook before brushing your teeth, before kissing your partner, before even forming a thought. You weren't just using Facebook, Facebook was using you. And then came the predictive interventions. In 2018, leaked internal memos revealed Facebook was experimenting with models that could predict when a user was about to fall into depression, or relapse into addiction, or even contemplate suicide. These models were shockingly accurate. But rather than solely offering help, some systems use this information to adjust ad targeting, selling products, not just wellness resources, to vulnerable users. It crossed a line from prediction to exploitation. Worse still, Facebook began quietly developing what researchers called social contagion vectors. These weren't ads or posts. They were entire social environments constructed to amplify certain beliefs. For example, if a user leaned toward vaccine skepticism, the algorithm didn't just show them one anti-vax article. It began surrounding them with like-minded content friend suggestions and groups. It fabricated a false consensus, a digital echo chamber where fringe beliefs felt mainstream. This wasn't accidental. Internal documents show that Facebook knew these cohesive clusters were breeding grounds for radicalization. Yet leadership resisted breaking them apart. Why? Because users in these clusters were more active, more emotionally engaged, and more predictable. In Facebook's business model, intensity was profitability. Over time, this dynamic had devastating effects on free will. Not because Facebook told you what to think, but because it told you what everyone else was thinking. And in doing so, it subtly redefined what felt acceptable, normal, or even true. If your entire feed validated your view, your brain took that as confirmation. Reality in this framework became a statistical illusion, a narrative shaped not by facts, but by feedback loops. This was the architecture of belief manipulation. No need for censorship. Just reorder the feed, highlight certain voices, suppress others. Facebook didn't delete content unless absolutely necessary. It simply made it invisible, or if desired, viral. And it wasn't just opinions, it was behavior. In 2012, Facebook ran a covert experiment on 61 million users to see if it could increase voter turnout. Users were shown different messages about voting. Some saw a simple reminder, others saw the same message, plus images of their friends who had voted. The group that saw the social message was significantly more likely to vote. The experiment worked. Facebook had influenced political behavior not with ads, but with interface design. This kind of intervention became more common. During the pandemic, Facebook tested whether it could reduce anti-lockdown protests by altering group recommendation structures. In some regions, the experiment worked. In others, it backfired. But the lesson was clear. Facebook could steer social movements, if not directly, then algorithmically. And this raised profound ethical questions. Who decides which behaviors are desirable? Who sets the moral compass of the algorithm? The answer in most cases was no one, or more precisely, the product team. A group of engineers and managers, mostly in their 20s and 30s, sitting in open-plan offices in Menlo Park, deciding how billions of people experience reality, not through democratic processes, but through metrics. Behind every design change was a KPI, a key performance indicator: time on platform, click-through rate, ad revenue. These metrics didn't capture truth well-being or social harmony. They captured addiction. So when engineers optimized for them, the platform evolved not into a civic square, but into a behavioral casino where human attention was the currency and manipulation the game. By 2020, Facebook had begun investing heavily in neurobehavioral research. Not just what users clicked, but how their pupils dilated during content exposure. Heart rate changes via smartwatch integration. Even biometric feedback from Oculus headsets. The goal: emotion-responsive content delivery, a future where your feelings shaped what you saw in real time. And as the metaverse approached, this ambition only deepened. In the virtual world, Facebook wouldn't just observe your behavior, it would simulate it. Every movement, every hesitation, every blink would be tracked. The potential for manipulation would be total. The user experience would no longer be a window, it would be a mirror. And Facebook would control the lighting. By the time the metaverse became more than a marketing buzzword, the world was already entangled in Facebook's behavioral infrastructure, or rather Meta's. The rebranding in late 2021 wasn't merely a shift in name. It was a pivot in mission from connecting people to owning the very architecture of reality. Mark Zuckerberg no longer wanted to build the world's largest social network. He wanted to build the next universe and ensure Meta wrote the laws of its physics. In the metaverse, data collection would no longer be limited to what you clicked. It would be total. Every eye twitch, vocal inflection, hand gesture, or body lean would be interpreted, processed, and archived. The like button was replaced by ambient biometric response. Did you stare longer at an avatar's face? Did your heart rate increase when a certain ad played? The system knew. And the system adapted. Facebook, now Meta, would have more behavioral telemetry than any state intelligence agency ever dreamed of. And unlike the NSA, it didn't need a warrant. It had terms of service. The implications were staggering. In Meta's vision of the future, entire economic, social, and psychological lives would be lived within proprietary platforms. Instead of scrolling through Instagram, you'd walk through virtual showrooms. Instead of reacting to comments, you'd feel virtual touch. And all of it, every moment, would be designed, moderated, and monetized by Meta. But with this immersive control came ethical catastrophe. Already, virtual harassment in early beta environments had prompted user trauma. Researchers warned that immersive platforms blurred the boundary between simulation and experience, especially for children. If Facebook in 2D could influence elections, what could Meta do in 3D? What does nudging look like when the entire world is a UX interface? Governments were unprepared. Regulatory frameworks built for cable television were now being asked to evaluate artificial environments governed by AI. The question wasn't whether Meta could manipulate people. That had been answered. The question was, would anyone stop them? Whistleblowers began to emerge. Frances Haugen's leaked documents in 2021 were just the start. More insiders came forward: data scientists, content moderators, behavioral engineers. They described a company addicted to growth, one that knowingly endangered vulnerable populations, distorted political discourse, and ignored harm if metrics were green. One whistleblower, a lead engineer in Meta's Reality Labs, revealed internal memos warning that the company's haptic feedback system was triggering trauma recall in users with PTSD. Another described how Meta's AI was being trained on emotionally volatile datasets, anger, fear, grief, to optimize content virality in the metaverse. When the executive team reviewed the report, one manager allegedly replied, "Can we make it convert better?" Meanwhile, democratic nations scrambled. In the EU, the Digital Services Act tried to enforce transparency. In the US, congressional hearings became routine yet ineffective. Mark Zuckerberg testified again, calm, technical, and evasive. At one point, when asked directly, "Do you believe Facebook has ever manipulated a national election?" he responded, "We don't see evidence that our platform systematically shifts electoral outcomes." But the evidence said otherwise. An internal Meta report leaked in 2023 detailed how platform adjustments before the Brazilian election had increased pro-Bolsonaro sentiment by 7%. In Kenya, Meta was accused of fueling ethnic violence through AI-translated hate speech. In Vietnam, the company reportedly agreed to government censorship requests in exchange for market access. Meta had become, in effect, a global soft power, stronger than many nation-states, and answerable to none. The public response was fractured. Some deleted their accounts, embracing decentralized platforms. Others became further entrenched in Meta's ecosystem, finding connection escape and identity in the virtual. For many, the platform was too embedded to leave. Their photos, memories, contacts, even their work lives tied to Facebook, Instagram, or WhatsApp. But a quiet rebellion began to form, not through riots or boycotts, but through digital literacy. Schools introduced algorithm awareness. Grassroots movements taught data sovereignty. Artists began exposing how recommendation systems shape taste. A new generation of coders developed privacy-first networks, open-source alternatives, and blockchain-backed identity systems. The war wasn't over. It had just changed arenas. At the same time, Meta faced unexpected resistance from within. Internal factions formed. Some engineers refused to build engagement-boosting algorithms unless aligned with ethical outcomes. A leaked Slack thread showed employees debating whether behavioral prediction should be capped. One wrote, "What if the most ethical thing is to make the platform less addictive?" The company didn't like that. Several high-profile engineers were quietly dismissed. Others left voluntarily, publishing manifestos about digital autonomy. But the damage was done. A cultural schism inside Meta began to mirror the broader social divide outside it. And through it all, one realization emerged. Facebook had never just been a product, it was a philosophy. The belief that data could improve society, that algorithms could replace institutions. That connection was always good. But that belief, once idealistic, had become a weapon. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded. And so, as we arrive at the end of this story, the question remains, what now? Do we regulate, break the platform apart? Nationalize it? Force transparency? Teach people to resist it? Or do we accept that the experiment has already succeeded, that a private company conducted the largest behavioral study in human history and is now writing the script for our digital future? In the end, maybe the most dangerous part wasn't the algorithm. It was the assumption that humans could be modeled like code, that belief behavior and free will could be streamlined into math, that autonomy could be A/B tested, that choice could be nudged, that the mind was just a dashboard and Facebook held the keys. This is not science fiction. This is now. The global mind control experiment didn't fail. It worked. And unless we act consciously, collectively, courageously, it will keep working. Because the greatest trick the algorithm ever pulled was convincing the world it didn't exist.